Right now, the tropics may be silent, but not for long. We'll talk about that and more in today's Outlook. So currently, the Atlantic, not looking too hot. You can see a little convective burst on the edge of this very, very large SAL outbreak. With some mid-latitude dry air intrusions up there. This is approaching the Lesser Antilles and will be there in about 2 to 3 days. And eventually it'll make its way to the southeast US coast, which is going to be something that we'll talk about another time. But right now, this is really putting a damper on AEW activity and, in general, just Atlantic tropical activity. It just stands in the middle of the MDR as a big, stable air mass, preventing tropical development. But you can see on the edge, away from the SAL, there's a slight chance of development. Right now, it's 0-10. You can see over the next few days, it's going to move into an area just north of Bermuda and south of Cape Cod. And it has a slight chance of making perhaps subtropical status in that area, but we'll have to watch and see with that one. A loop of it shows there's some convection associated with it, but it looks a little asymmetric at this point. You can also see a roaring Eastern Pacific intertropical convergence zone. Okay, so let's move on to the GFS. Well, first let's take a look at the Eastern North Pacific outlook. So you can see quite a few yellow X's in yellow areas out in the Eastern Pacific, that powerful intertropical convergence zone. This will be something to watch as we head into next week. We have a 1-30-10 right here. 30-0, a 30-10, and then 0-20. So let's take a look at what the models say about that. The GFS spins up the 0-30, and it gives a little bit to the 0-10. It's not so optimistic on the 30-10, and to the 0-20. Let's see. So the 0-20 doesn't really show much. Again, not as optimistic, but it does show a storm spinning up behind it. So that may be something to watch as we head into next week. Headed on to the CMC model. You can see it's a little more bullish. It's less bullish with the other areas, but it's a little more bullish with the 30-10, and it brings it into hurricane strength before it gets pushed into central northern Mexico, east into northwest Mexico. The euro. Let's take a look at the euro too. Again, the euro is the least bullish of all the models. You can see it gives a brief, short spin up, and pretty long time to the 30-10, and a little bit of a spin up. We'll go check that out in the Central Pacific to the 0-30. We don't really have any invest yet, but we do have the area of interests. You see, it does give a short, weak spin up to that storm. It brings it down to it brings it to a weak tropical storm, maybe just a tropical depression. We don't really know at this point. It's still far out, but the models aren't super bullish on it, so I don't expect it to be too powerful of a tropical cyclone outbreak. So let's just take a look at the Atlantic and just the global SST pattern real quick. You can see the Eastern Pacific is slightly warmer than normal, but the elephant in the room is that big powerful La Nina down near the equatorial Pacific. And you can also see warm Pacific subtropics, warmer than normal Pacific subtropics. So that could put a damper on especially Central Pacific activity, but also Eastern Pacific activity. You can also see, so let's move over to the Atlantic now. You can see colder than normal subtropics, powerful Canary Current, and a very warm MDR. I discussed this and the implications it may have later in the season in my other hurricane season outlook. Go check that out. another video on my channel. So you can also see the IOD right here starting to possibly flip, but that'll be something to watch as we get later into the season. Looking at the tropical cyclone heat potential in the Atlantic, you can see the tropics have a higher than normal heat potential, especially in the Central Caribbean. You can see very high heat potentials across the entire Caribbean as a whole. So definitely something very, very that warrants watching. Just taking a look at the global tropics hazard outlook, you can see we have a small risk or possibly some tropical development across the EPAC. Not this week. That was in the last outlook. They pulled back on that. But next week, there's a slight possibility. They have some here. They have an area of interest here. So again, those two NHC area of interest, they give a higher chance to the one near the to the 020. And you can also see the intertropical convergence zone will be booming. So definitely on par with what we've seen so far this season. And just kind of a closing note, you can see the Madeline-Julian oscillation will in fact move over the Atlantic basin by next week. And so that could definitely, I think the Atlantic should be watched for development. We could see something. We can see hour 360, day 5, so June 30th through July 5th. This is an average of that. So yeah, so early July, I think we could watch for something early July. We may start to see a tiny flare up then, based on the MJO, but again, it's still kind of uncertain at this point. Well, anyways, thank you for watching. I hope you tune in tomorrow for my short tropical outlook, and bye.